Yeah, like you said, my name is Mikey Veenstra. A little bit about me. I'm a threat analyst at Defiant. If that's not a name you're familiar with, we are the company that makes WordFence, the security plugin for WordPress. As a threat analyst, my job is to do a number of things. I do malware research and vulnerability assessments to build malware signatures and firewall rules, just to help protect their customers. I also do a lot of our blogging these days. I'm a GIAC advisory board member. GIAC is the Global Information Assurance Certification. They're a board that does security professional certifications. And I'm just sort of a standard issue geek dad. I've got a beautiful 2-year-old, and that's kind of what I do in my free time, hang out with her. So information security is in the news a whole lot lately. I don't know if you've noticed that. And it's kind of scary. You know, it seems like every 90 seconds or so, you're hearing about some data breach or just massive invasion of privacy taking place. And for the layperson, that can be terrifying. You know, these are places that we trust with our data, with our money. We don't want to hear that this is getting stolen. But the silver lining here is that we are hearing about it. You know, it can be disillusioning to hear that the internet's held together with mud and leaves, but at least we know now. It always has been. And the fact that we're hearing about it and that these disclosures are happening is actually a net benefit for the industry. But the fact that awareness is going up isn't really seeming to stop the attacks. I know I personally see a lot of sites getting hacked all the time. Maybe it's just because it's sort of my job, but I'm sure a lot of you guys see it too. And the differences are, I think, in the fact that there's a difference between knowing something and understanding it. I know factually that the sun is about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just a fact. I don't have any meaningful or practical understanding of just how hot 10,000 degrees might be. I just know that that is a number. And so just the fact that you guys might know that having a good password is important, or updating WordPress is important, it doesn't necessarily suggest that the people understand why it's important or how important it is actually. And this is important because WordPress powers 30% of all websites on the internet. 60% if we're only counting ones with content management systems. And supply and demand just sort of dictates that it's a big target. It's very profitable to make malware for something people use. This is sort of the way it is. Think back to like 2007 or so. The iPhone had just come out in June. Mac OS X had about 4.3% market share of the desktop users. And we started in 2008 to see that whole Get a Mac campaign. I remember Justin Long and John Hodgman on the Mac, have a PC, I'm boring, I'm cool. One of the big cornerstones of that entire ad campaign was that Macs just don't get viruses. Remember that? We stopped hearing about that a couple of years later. 2011 came around. Mac had jumped up from 4.3 to a little over 8% market share of the desktop market. And hackers noticed, and we started seeing things like OS X Skinhead, I think was the name of that one, the Black Hole Rat, just a couple of just sort of semi-prominent malwares. I mean, it still wasn't that popular, but enough to make people stop talking about it quite so much. And it's because of that market share improvement. So where there is a user base, there will be exploits for it. And I want you to remember that while we're talking about this, because talking about all the malware and all the different attacks that we can do on a WordPress site should not suggest to you that WordPress is less secure than its alternatives. It's just really popular and it gets a lot of attention. It's sort of straightforward there. While we're talking about this, it's important that we put our hacker hat on. That line is something that one of my instructors at SANS taught me, just because it's that important that you're looking at your infrastructure, at your site, through the eyes of the people who want to be attacking it. So keep in mind when we're talking about this stuff, how would you look at it if you were one of the bad guys? And then when you're going back to your employer or your personal projects, I want you to think about the stuff that I'm talking about today and try to look at your infrastructure the way the bad guys will. And that's going to be the big difference here. We're going to be looking today at two examples, fictional ones, of an attack that takes place from start to finish. One of them is from a script kiddie, who is a sort of low sophistication, low skill attacker. They come out in droves. They're going to win the numbers game, so they're a constant threat. The second attacker is going to be a little bit more professional. Maybe they're a nation-state attacker. Maybe they're just involved in organized crime. But whatever the case may be, they've got some skill and they've got the motivation to use it. And we're going to be following them through 4 phases of a typical attack. Now, these phases aren't like an industry standard thing. You can probably Google this, you're not going to see it. And nobody's sitting there going like, ha, I've entered the infection phase. I win, admin. Like, nobody's doing that.
Dr. Evil style.
Yeah. So what I want you to do, though, is keep in mind these phases when you're looking at your infrastructure. Because any sort of threat model requires you to have something in place at each of these stages. You can't go forward assuming that nobody will ever breach your site. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But these are sort of the 4 logical steps in the progression and how we're going to look at it. So our first example is going to be our script kiddie, and we're going into the discovery phase. So during discovery, we are gathering intelligence. In the case of our script kiddie, they probably just have a list of domains, big old one that they grabbed from somewhere, and they're just going to throw stuff at that list of domains until something sticks. I don't know how well you, oh, it's actually pretty good right there. But this is the output from something called WPScan. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. It's an open source vulnerability scanner for WordPress sites. It's really good software. And we enumerated that there was a plugin installed called Flickr Picture Backup version 0.7 that has a vulnerability. If you actually look there, you can see last updated 2014-09-03. And actually, that is the latest version. That plugin was discontinued and removed from the repository because it contained a massive unauthenticated file upload vulnerability. We'll talk about that actual vulnerability in specific during the next step, but just the fact that we were able to scan a bunch of sites and find this vulnerability on one of them means that we found a target. On the other hand, our more professional attacker has an actual specific target in mind. You know, they're not fishing for somebody to get just to do whatever on. They actually have somebody that they're targeting. And maybe it's just somebody they personally don't like. Maybe it's a target that they're being paid to attack. But whatever the case may be, they know who they want, and they need to find a way in. The first step of that is going to be to gather intelligence. We're going to aggregate OSINT, or open source intelligence, on the organization itself and all the members that we can find any data on. We're going to be looking for things like email addresses. Emails are going to be handy, both so we know how their email address scheme works, so we can guess some usernames and stuff, but also because we can start to extrapolate from that, find other accounts on social media, find the employees on LinkedIn, go from LinkedIn to find all the employees' Twitter accounts, things like that. We can gather knowledge about their infrastructure, and there's a couple of clever ways to do that. But the easiest one, I think, is if you go on a company's LinkedIn and every one of their developers says they use Rails, I wonder what their website runs on. And the other thing we can look at is exploitable personnel. This is going to come up more for your higher class attacks where money and resources are no object. But if I really, really, really wanted to get into an organization, I'm going to find whichever one of their sysadmins is complaining the most about being broke on Facebook, and I'm going to bribe them. I don't need a vulnerable WordPress site to bribe your admin. I just need money. I don't have that. But and then we can do some word list generation as a last ditch resort. So we're going to be scraping the web pages. We're going to be scraping your social media posts, just sort of trying to identify any unusual amounts of unusual words that you might be using, because that's going to help paint us a picture about maybe what your infrastructure passwords look like. It's a bit of a stretch, that one, but it is a technique that gets used, and it is successful more than you would think. So our takeaways during this discovery phase, nothing has happened yet, but they've gathered a lot of information, and what can we have done to stop that, or at least mitigate it, right? In our script kiddie example, we can limit the effectiveness of automated scanners using web application firewalls. Again, I don't want to talk about the specific vulnerability in this step, but just about any decent WAF is going to identify these sort of low-effort probes and swat them out of the sky. The other side of that is the fact that they had your name on a list, and I'm sorry, but they're going to get it. There's just not any preventing them from trying. And then in our second, more sophisticated example, that one's tough, right? You can't be super draconian about your social media policy with your employees and your users. But if you need to, you can build some awareness about what is and is not okay to share. You know, I don't want you to sit there and tell your devs not to say that they use Rails on LinkedIn, but at least try to think about what information you don't want disseminated and build a stance around that. That one's going to be something more tailor-made. There's no just definitely do this and that will do it. It just depends on what you're running. So after we've done the discovery, we need to get in. That first time that we get in is critical, right? Every other time we go back and forth and establish a backdoor, that's nothing. But that first time that we get into a system that doesn't want us there is the tough part. Our first example is going to be pretty easy. It already told us what the vulnerability was. We just need to exploit it. Can you see that code at all up there? Mm-hmm. So this is the proof of concept code written by the individual who discovered the vulnerability. The Flickr picture backup plugin, the intent of it, at least, was so that an admin could plug in a URL for a photo on Flickr, the image hosting site, and then their site would pull down a copy of it to host locally. I don't know if that's the solution I would have done for that, but there we are. The problem is that it did no validation of any kind. It didn't check if you were authenticated, didn't check if you were an admin on top of that. It didn't check to see that you were connecting it to Flickr. It didn't check to see that what you were downloading was a picture. So effectively what this means is if you install and activate this plugin, anybody that knows about it can just download stuff to your site, including a PHP web shell that I can use to execute more nastiness and really dig myself in there. And all you did was install this plugin. In our second example, so we've built up all of this open source intelligence. We've got a dossier of users, email addresses, technologies, and there's all sorts of stuff. But, you know, we can get into social engineering now. We can start pretending that we're somebody we're not, start spoofing email addresses. For the purposes of keeping this talk to 45 minutes, we're going to say that a handful of users appeared on password breaches. Are we familiar with Have I Been Pwned? Anybody not? Just in case somebody listening on the stream isn't, so Have I Been Pwned is a service you can use to cross-reference email addresses with lists of public data breaches. So if we found a number of users who have breached passwords, and we have access to those breached passwords themselves, what we can do is start launching credential stuffing attacks, where we are just throwing combinations of these valid usernames and formerly valid, at least, passwords, and seeing if something lets us in. Now, the odds of any one user still using their old password that got breached 3 years ago, fairly low. But when we apply that to a numbers game, we have a handful of people we're trying this against, the odds increase. Get a little bit more sophisticated, maybe we start tweaking the numbers at the end of their old breach password, we might find something, right? So we're authenticating as a privileged user just by the fact that they already had their password breached. Coming out of the intrusion phase, some favors that we could have done ourselves before. In our first example, the low-hanging fruit vulnerability exploit stuff all comes down to best practices. I mean, I really doubt that I'm the first person to come up here and tell you to run WordPress updates. But it's that important because one plugin with the wrong code in it, and if somebody finds it, that's it. Game over. It doesn't matter that you intended to update. And so the other thing is, like in the case of that Flickr plugin, it was discontinued. 4 years ago, it was removed from the WordPress repository. You need to at least be apprised of that when that happens. If you're not doing anything to monitor it yourself, you need to use a third party to keep track of that for you. And then with the credential stuffing, you can just about entirely prevent it by blocking the use of breached passwords. Have I Been Pwned has a great API that you can use to do that. There's a number of plugins, WordFence included, that will do it for you as well. And two-factor, right? If you need my phone to log in as me, it's not really that big a deal that you have my password. I mean, it is a big, big deal that you have my password, don't get me wrong. But in that instant, they are not getting into my website. Once we're in, we need to start working on our end game. Why did we bother in the first place? So in our script kiddie example, they're doing a throwback to a staple of the internet history, and they're running the spam mailer. This one in the screenshot is really basic. It's missing some functionality like scheduling and attachment handling, but it'll get the job done. Now, maybe we are actually doing legitimate but sketchy advertising for legitimate but sketchy products. Like maybe we are selling nondescript arbitrary pills to people. But more likely what we're doing is redirecting people and trying to herd victims over to a more sophisticated attack. Something like a phishing site or maybe a malware dropper. We see cases where the people doing the sort of day-to-day infections on the piddly little sites and sending out the spam email, there's a good chance that they're working for somebody that has something more sophisticated, or they're just sort of getting a kickback from victims that they send over. Our second example, the victim was an e-commerce site. So what we're going to do there is we're going to inject some JavaScript into their application's payment processing and get it to send us a copy of everybody's credit cards every time they send it out. I don't know if you're familiar with the card skimmer on the ATM in the picture. That one doesn't use JavaScript. Nothing's more than plastic. But it's the same kind of deal, right? And this isn't something that an SSL will prevent. We're not snatching it out of midair en route. We're actually just making the server send us a copy. And we hoard maybe 50, 60 of them, sell them all at once, and make a buck. The takeaways during the infection phase, unfortunately, if you've gotten here, it's kind of sucky. It can be really, really tough to successfully remediate once they've gotten in, but you still need to, right? Monitoring your system for file changes, and I mean like actual file change monitoring, like hash-based and size-based, rather than looking at timestamps, because that's easily fooled. And then implement a malware scanner. We'll talk a little bit later about why a malware scanner isn't a silver bullet for everything, but it is still a very important part of your security position because it can notify you of things. And that's for both examples. And the final step is the response. So this one is, we're flipping the script a little bit. So the first steps were the attacker doing stuff, right? After the infection phase, there's an arbitrary amount of time, functionally infinite in reverse as far as the victim is concerned. But it's the span of time between when you got in and started doing your thing and when they found you. The response in example 1 with their spam mailer, if they hadn't found out about it through one of the earlier ways that they could have mitigated it, they're probably going to learn about it because their host has told them that they're sending spam email. Their email outgoing relays have gotten blacklisted. Maybe they're showing up on spam block lists. The reputation impact, it depends on what you're using that email for. If you're doing all of your internal email from your web server, that's probably not great in the first place, bad. But that's going to be hampered because all of your emails are going to be going into spam. And at best, all of the contact form replies and any marketing you send out from your site, that could also be getting sent to those blacklists as well. And getting off of those is not the easiest thing in the world. If it was, they probably wouldn't bother using you to do it in the first place. Our second example, if they haven't found out because of a malware scanner or something, they're probably going to be contacted by a financial institution. Familiar with the concept of common point of purchase? So Visa, Amex, any of the card authorities out there, if they start to notice a pattern, you know, hey, 30 of these stolen credit cards from the past 60 days have all made a purchase at blank website. We're going to talk to blank website about it. And so that can be a big, big deal because if your users end up finding out that you are the reason their credit card got stolen, that's not a good look. I don't know really any better way to put it. And it's a tailspin that can be really hard to knock yourself out of. Our takeaways from this, like I said, be monitoring your server. In the case of our spam mailer, if we're looking at the use of our mail relays on the way out, and we see a big spike in that one day, we know that something weird is going on. If you're not looking at that, or you don't have something alerting you when there is a spike, it will go unnoticed. Other resource theft attacks, like crypto miners, stuff like that, you can see spikes in your resource usage, and if they don't correspond to something else legitimate, it's a red flag. If you see a bunch of resource usage correlate with a big spike in traffic, fine, but if you don't, then where did that come from? And in our second example, this one, unfortunately, is a tiny bit harsh, but if you can't confidently secure your e-commerce site, you might want to consider a third-party payment processor. It's a cost-benefit thing, I get it. They're going to charge you fees for every transaction, but securing it was going to cost you something in the first place. So consider which one is going to be more cost-effective going forward and implement whatever you need to, whether that is hiring a security expert or just offloading that process to begin with. And then some takeaways for both in the response phase. Like I said, a malware scanner is not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet. They're really good for notifying you that something happened, but they can't kill every possible backdoor. Now, they can kill every file-based backdoor, like web shells and things like that. But what if I put on a rogue public key on your account when I got in the first time? If I put my SSH public key on your cPanel hosting account, I can just log in as you whenever I want, and your malware scanner doesn't know the difference. If it could identify a malicious public key, I would be a billionaire tomorrow. And there's other places that you can hide that aren't quite files. I mean, we can open up a port and do some reverse listening. That way we can just sort of come in the old-fashioned way. When you hear about a backdoor on a system in 1998, it was pretty much a reverse port. And then another thing to keep in mind is you really, the natural response is to try and hunt down your attacker and bring swift justice to them. But the odds are you're never going to find out who it was. The IP address that shows up in your logs very unlikely has anything to do with the physical location of the person who did it. VPNs are cheap, Tor is free, and they might have just launched it from a server they already infected to begin with. That doesn't mean don't try to launch an investigation, don't try to involve the authorities, but measure your expectations about where this will go. And then last, it sounds like it goes without saying, but don't interfere with an investigation. What I mean by that is if you think somebody is going to need to come in and triage, find out what happened, and write a report, don't try to be helpful and kill the malware yourself. If you start deleting things, that removes the evidence that we were going to use to find out what happened and how they were using it. So do both of us a favor, and if you're not comfortable with the malware remediation process, wait for the expert. We talked about two separate sort of tiers of attack, right? We've got script kiddies at the bottom of this pyramid. There's just a ton of them. They're basically just bots with a pulse. And every site on the internet has to deal with them. It's just sort of a fact. And protecting yourself against those sort of low-effort probes is a priority for any site on the internet. Now, the more sophisticated attacker, maybe, right? This is when people are thinking, I don't have anything important, why would somebody hack me? The person they have in mind is the super sophisticated hacker from movies that gets paid $1 million a second to hack into cities. And no, maybe they're not interested in your quilt selling website, but they're interested in something. And we are in a room full of higher education professionals. I'm willing to bet that there's a system on your network that has a whole lot of data that I would want as a bad guy. Maybe some personal records about students, maybe some financial information. Might not be stored on the WordPress site, but I could maybe use that to pivot around your network. And so I'm going to try. So if you if you have anything to do with sensitive information, even if it's not on the systems that we're immediately discussing, you have to treat it all as part of the same ecosystem, because it is. That's where we want to discuss what do I have and who might want it, okay? If you have something that might be of interest to somebody of a little bit more skill and resources, you need to factor that in. I can't really, in the scope of this conversation, tell you how to figure out exactly who your threat is. That's something that people get paid a lot more money than me to go in and figure out for you. But it's important to get done, or at least think about, because you don't want to waste resources on all of this high-quality security training in case your secretary gets socially engineered if you don't actually need that. It's all cost-benefit. So think about your risk factors. If you think there's cause for concern, act on it. Shore up where you can, because there's always somewhere that you can improve. And I mean that, really, that there is always somewhere that you can improve. No system is 100% secure. Even if you're running a flat file HTML site, no dynamic code, it's on a lockdown server, you have to physically type in every change on the box in the data center. I don't care. Because if it is a priority to me and resources are no object, then there is a vulnerability. If it's not the code, if it's not the server, it might be a human. And it's important because of that to assume breach. So that phrase, assume breach, is pretty common in security editorialism. The breach first model is really killer if you don't have a sophisticated risk analysis profile, because really your options are assume you got breached or assume you will never get breached. And I'll tell you which one is more secure. So if we're assuming breach, that means that we're assuming A, that we could have already been breached in the past and just don't know. And B, we're assuming that we will inevitably be breached in the future. And we have to be assuming breach at each of those 4 steps. With every layer of your security model, it's important that you assume everything prior to that had failed. If you just front load everything and just put thousands and thousands of dollars into this crazy firewall, it's not going to help you if something does get around it. So do each step in turn, at least a little, you know? You don't need to, I still can't land on the exact way I've always wanted to phrase this, but if you are front loading everything and assume that nothing is going to get through it, and you had laxed on the other things behind it, so if you don't have very good file change monitoring or really any intrusion detection system, it doesn't matter how great your firewall was. And then any money that you spent on that firewall on top of what you spent on everything else was sort of a loss. And so you want to be shoring up things in turn. Improve your firewall, improve your intrusion detection. Don't let one thing fall aside just because you assume it'll never happen. Don't forget to do an incident response plan because you're assuming nobody will ever get in. Don't cease to do backups because you don't think anybody will ever want to hack you or delete stuff. Because you have to assume that the internet knows everything, because it eventually will. Thanks. This ran a little bit short, but I wanted to make sure that there was time for questions. I know the online thing wasn't quite working great, so now is the time if there are any questions. Yeah.
So I'm not a security expert at all.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, aside from the things you talked about, where are places to go? Because it seems like it's always evolving and changing. How do you keep up to date? Where are some places to read about stuff and learn?
So the question, if you couldn't hear, was how do you keep up to date with this sort of ever-changing security ecosystem? And the answer is, it is my day job. It takes time. But there are places, there's a lot of security experts you can follow on Twitter. Especially depending on your industry, it's good to at least have a couple of resources or authorities that you're subscribing to. Maybe their mailing list, like Troy Hunt's mailing list is great. Swift on Security, if you like hearing about stuff, but also like cynicism a lot, is a good Twitter feed to follow. But it's really just keeping in touch with the community and keeping your ear to the ground. Keep your eye on the news. Make sure that you're following, your favorite security provider for your favorite platform if you want. I don't want to get too much into a pitch right now, but yeah, just and if you use like Google products or something, eventually Google's going to figure out that you're interested and start feeding you stuff anyway. Anything else? Yeah.
Kind of the same question, but focused in on WordPress. Who's out there writing? I know there are companies out there that are providing security services specifically for the WordPress environment, but who's out there writing about WordPress security that you follow?
So the question was sort of similar for WordPress specifically. Who is out there to follow? I'm out there.
I was setting you up for that.
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter. Hey, it's Mikey V. I tweet everything that we do at WordFence just about. You can follow our feed. Or really, any of the security providers out there, they're going to be getting the news to you in some form or another. And whatever package they get it to you in, it's up to you what you prefer, really. So go with all of them. Go with one of them. But as long as you're following it and you're making that effort, you're going to be above 90% of the other people in your industry. As far as actual individuals, just for the sake of that, Aaron Campbell, the WP security lead, is a good one. For them, I'm fairly new to the WordPress specific space, so most of my stuff is general security as far as the experts I follow. Other than that. Anybody else? Neat. Well, I did end a little bit early. I don't really know how to release you guys, but big on. No, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was educational. Definitely feel free to stop by. I'll be at the WordFence booth today and tomorrow if you have any other questions or things that come to your mind, or if you just want to hang out and take laps. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming.
Awesome. Thank you.